Well, the situation in Lebanon, of course, we're on the verge. It's like between a mini war and an all-out war. That's where we find ourselves in now. The Israelis have expanded their bombardment. If you saw yesterday night, there was an attack in the eastern part of Beirut, which is normally not attacked.
As the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah rapidly escalates with no signs of slowing down, and Israel continuing to bomb various parts of southern Lebanon, we spoke to security and political analyst Ali Rizk in Beirut to get a clearer picture of what is going on, following roughly a year of limited attacks from both sides, which seems to be spiraling out of control.
So the Israelis this time are attacking places which have never been struck before. Obviously, that's led to a state of fear, a state of terror. Many people are asking for how long is this going to continue. Now, regarding what brought Lebanon to this situation, I think that Hezbollah made the decision on October 8th to express solidarity with Hamas as a result of Operation Al-Aqsa Storm. Now, I think that part of that was ideological and part of that was due to Hezbollah's own self-interests, because if you recall, this particular Israeli government, before October 7, it had its sights set on Hezbollah. It used to say Hezbollah was the main threat. So obviously there was a fear on the part of Hezbollah that should this Israeli government succeed against Hamas, Hezbollah is going to be next. And I think that that was one of the main reasons also which drove them to take this action.
What would you say in Lebanon the sentiment is towards those decisions that Hezbollah took?
Obviously, there is a division in Lebanon. There's always been very sharp divisions in Lebanon when it comes to Hezbollah. But I think, ironically, this time around, it's a bit different in terms of being a bit more different in favor of Hezbollah. The number of Hezbollah's domestic opponents has decreased. I think that one of the main reasons for that is due to Hezbollah's support for the Gazans. Now, as you know, we're talking about Gazans who are Sunni Muslims. And so that Shia-Sunni divide, which maybe very much existed during the Syrian crisis, that has gradually been swept away. And now you see more Sunni Shia solidarity, more sympathy towards Hezbollah because it's supporting what they call, a Sunni people. And this is what forced some or made some prominent Sunni politicians in Lebanon like Saad Hariri. He issued a statement condemning the Israeli attack, which took out Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. He said it was a cowardly act. And I think any Sunni senior politician cannot afford but to issue those stances.
What is the status of Hezbollah after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah? Particularly given that I think what we saw was a kind of bottom-up assassinations in Hezbollah's leadership.
Look, Hezbollah's situation right now, I think you have to look at it in two directions. The first is that Hezbollah has been dealt some severe, unprecedented blows, and there's no doubt about that. Many people say that this isn't the first time Hezbollah's leader has been taken out. They refer to Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi. But you have to remember, Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi remained or was the head of Hezbollah for 1 year. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah led Hezbollah for 32 years. So I think it's rather incomparable. At the same time, I think that this Israeli strategy or this Israeli approach, it does carry its own risks in that it could push Hezbollah. Now Hezbollah is behaving stemming from a thirst for revenge. Many of the fighters, what we saw yesterday, we saw 8 Israeli soldiers being killed, for example. I think another important aspect is that due to how Sayyid Hassan was seen as an idol, not just by Hezbollah members, but also by those who support Hezbollah, but are not necessarily members, active members of the movement. I think that what happened now with his assassination could quite possibly drive those supporters who aren't active members to join Hezbollah as they seek their own revenge against the Israeli side. So yes, on the one hand, Hezbollah has suffered. On the other hand, in the long term, this might not have been a very smart approach which Israel took.
Prior to the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, we saw some very different styles of attacks by Israel on majority Hezbollah members, but also Lebanese public with the pager attacks and the walkie-talkie attacks. Many people have said that this is an indication of some levels of infiltration into Hezbollah. What would you say about that?
Look, what happened prior to the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was a security intelligence war, which I think is unprecedented in modern history by the Israeli side. It culminated with the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Were there some moles, or was Hezbollah infiltrated? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's not impossible. There have been cases before where members of Hezbollah were caught working for the CIA. I remember that back years ago. So that is possible, but I think you also have a very advanced technological element this time, which could assist Israel in pursuing such a kind of war. And I think that this was the main element due to the precision and how the attacks were carried out very consecutively. I think that technology played a major role. I might be mistaken. There might have been more of a human element. I'm not sure. But in this kind of war, it's clear that Israel does enjoy the upper hand in security and intelligence warfare. I think what they were trying to do is to lay the ground for the ground incursion, because if they want to achieve their goal of returning the settlers to the north, that ground incursion has to take place. I think what they had hoped for is that by doing this, these consecutive blows, they would weaken Hezbollah to the extent that Hezbollah would no longer be the formidable ground force it was in 2006. Now, if you look at what happened yesterday, that doesn't appear to be the case. So regardless of the damage which has been done, Hezbollah still remains a force to be reckoned with on the ground, as we can see with the events that have took place.
What do you think about Israel's statements or claims that it will do a limited ground operation in Lebanon?
I think that can't be ruled out that the Israelis might be deceiving or not speaking the truth, and that they have bigger intentions than that, particularly with this government, which, as I said, has had its eyes set on Lebanon for quite a while. So we can't discount that possibility. Now, on the other hand, the Americans are very much against an Israeli escalation on the Lebanese front. I think they've been forced by the Netanyahu government to be dragged into it somewhat, or to approve of it. So I think that when the Israelis speak about a limited ground operation, they're trying maybe to reassure the Americans that they're not going to go very far. Now, are they tricking the Americans? I think that's possible. It wouldn't be the first time. They've done quite a lot in this latest round. So it might be the case that Netanyahu is trying to trick the American side. And if the Israelis were to launch a broader campaign, that could have some very serious repercussions, because we all know how Hezbollah has this very strong network of ideological allies, if you would like. When I say ideological allies, I'm referring to the Houthis, for example, in Yemen. I'm referring to certain groups in Iraq. And importantly, and I think this is one of the reasons why the Americans are concerned, be it the Yemenis, the Houthis in Yemen, or the Iraqis, they both are quite close to American targets and can inflict some pain on some American military assets. So should that situation unfold in such a manner whereby Israel carries out a larger scale operation, particularly if that puts Hezbollah in an existential danger, I think that you're going to see these other fronts ignite, and they already are, by the way, taking some kind of action. More importantly, I think that should Hezbollah find itself in an existential crisis, you're sure to be Iran coming in. You saw the Iranian operation, I think, the Operation Truthful Promise, the second one. I think that this operation was a much larger scale. It was double the previous one, primarily because this time around Hezbollah is involved, and Hezbollah is now combating the Israeli side. So imagine what would happen should Hezbollah find itself under an existential threat. How would Iran react? Iran has been restrained thus far, but when it comes to Hezbollah, I think Iran will go to great lengths to prevent the defeat of its number one regional ally.
What do you think of the timing of this escalation? We're coming up to the 1 year mark of the 7th of October. Over the past year, Israel and Hezbollah dealt kind of limited controlled blows to each other.
Well, before they started this latest round of escalation, the Israeli opinion polls had revealed that a majority of the Israelis support a larger scale operation on the Lebanese front. This is the same case with the Israeli opposition. People like Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, they were also very supportive. And I think that Netanyahu didn't want to look weak in front of the public and, generally speaking, in front of his other opponents. He wanted to prove his own security credentials, if you would like. I think this was one major reason. And you have to remember that his reputation as being Mr. Security was largely shattered as a result of October 7. Now, what better way to repair that damage and to repair, because the Israelis were also, they proved to be somewhat incapable of defeating, not somewhat, they did prove to be incapable of achieving their goals of eliminating Hamas. Now, what better way to improve that situation than to take out Israel's number one enemy, Israel's nemesis, the party which fought Israel to a standstill in 2006. Many people even say that it defeated Israel in 2006. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is known to be the mortal enemy of the Israelis. So this would be the best way for Netanyahu, I think, to improve his own legacy. In addition, it might serve other purposes like, drawing or bringing us closer to a confrontation with Iran, which might also drag the US. That might be, by the way, where we're headed. I'm not sure. It's well known that Hezbollah has its own institutions that provide, for example, it has its own supermarkets, its own medical institutions. What was attacked yesterday in eastern Beirut was a health institution that is affiliated with Hezbollah. I think what the Israelis are doing right now, or are in the process of doing, is to also eliminate those services provided by the party, not just only on its military organization, but also to attack those other branches. This might have the effect of maybe curtailing Hezbollah's own popularity, striking at Hezbollah's own internal environment. Where are we heading? If this is any sign, this latest attack, I think we're headed towards more and broader escalation. Now, are we headed to a 2006 style war where Israel attacked the airports, attacked civilian infrastructure? I think that remains to be seen. I think for now, perhaps the Israelis are hesitant to do that because Hezbollah does maintain the capacity this time to respond in kind at Israel's own airports, at Israel's own infrastructure. And I think that the Americans are also very much against an all-out war on Lebanon due to the severe repercussions. And the Iranians, I believe, sent a clear sign as to where we would find ourselves in should that take place. So we appear to be in an escalation which, it remains below a certain threshold. Could that change? It's possible. Israel's goals right now, I think that the Israelis aren't really thinking strategically. In my previous answer, I mentioned how Netanyahu is focusing on his own legacy. So I think that more than strategic thinking, they're thinking about their own personal agenda, their own personal legacies, what they can achieve, etc. I'm not sure there's a big strategic element to it. They have announced the goal of returning the settlers to the north. I'm not sure how realistic that is. I'm not even sure how bombarding areas in eastern Beirut fits in with such goals. There may be one strategic goal which I have in mind, which is to drag the US into a broader confrontation. Joe Biden's statements yesterday when he said that I don't support attacks on Iranian nuclear sites, they appear to be drawing some red lines for the Israelis. The question is, will the Israelis listen? Because they've crossed the American lines many, many times, even when Biden was in a much stronger position than he is now. He's now a lame duck president who's not up for a second term. But in terms of the goals, as I said, I don't see any real strategic goals. And I don't even see the Israelis pursuing a approach which is strategically based or strategically wise. I think they're focusing on some tactical successes, making themselves look good without taking too much or giving too much of a priority or focus on Israel's long-term strategic well-being.
And Hezbollah's goals?
Hezbollah's goals for the time being will be to rebuild itself. I've heard that from Hezbollah's sources themselves. They're going to rebuild. They're going to, try and focus on the message that they haven't been broken. There have been some media tours. There was a media tour yesterday in southern Beirut for Hezbollah's media spokesman, and he spoke to reporters. So this indicates a clear effort to show that, Hezbollah's still there. Hezbollah still has fighting capabilities. We saw this translated on the ground. I think that Hezbollah's goals right now are mere survival and to prove that the party is still effective. And I think that poses a problem for the Israeli side, because after all of this hype about Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah being killed, if Hezbollah can preserve itself, that I think would be a setback for the Israelis, because mere self-preservation, merely self-preserving, that would mean that Hezbollah, at the very least, hasn't lost.